Hello and welcome to our first Quilts for Survivors tutorial. Someone had asked how we do machine binding, so we're going to take a few minutes. It takes about an hour, 45 minutes to do a full quilt, these size anyways. This is pretty much a standard size quilt, so the 48 by 64. We have a big, huge piece of binding. I'm not going to show you how to make binding. I'll just explain a very simple process. So what you do is you make strips, usually 2.5-inch strips. This one was actually made a little smaller. It's 2-inch strips. So you cut them, you sew them together, and then you just press them. Wrong sides together so you get a nice clean line, and then we just sew it all the way around the quilt twice. So we're gonna, because we're machine quilting and we're going to finish it on the machine, we're going to sew it onto the back first and then flip it around and finish it on the front. You can use a decorative stitch on the front, or you can just keep your straight stitch as well. So we're gonna start with that. So I'm just going to explain what I'm doing as we go along. So I usually start, you pick any side, top, bottom, or sides, it doesn't matter. To me it doesn't matter, maybe to some people it does, but to me it doesn't matter. And I usually try to leave about a 12-inch tail. I just eyeball it. You could measure it. You want about a 10-inch, 12-inch tail. So this ruler is 12 inches, so as long as we have about that much. So, you know, a bit of a tail, because you want to be able to join them together when you go all the way around. Then you want an opening of about 12 inches as well. So 10-inch tails, 12-inch opening. And then you're just going to put your raw edges together. So there's 2 raw edges, and then there's your raw edge of your quilt. Our quilt has been completely trimmed nice and straight. No big pieces of fabric or batting in the way. And then we're just going to start. And you don't want to start in a corner. You want to start somewhere in the middle of the quilt. You don't want to finish in a corner either. You don't want to be joining it up and worrying about that corner. I like to use, if I can, a thread color that matches the binding, because then it hides any little oopsies or slides, like where my stitch kind of goes off a little bit. Hides all those little imperfections. I'm not the greatest at binding, but I do enjoy it. I'm just going to throw that right on the floor so it's not pulling. You want to make sure you have lots of room to do your binding. If your table where your machine isn't big enough to hold your quilt, put a chair up or a stool, something to kind of keep it from hanging too much, because then it'll pull. So we're going to sew about 1/4 inch from the edge, maybe a little less, but not too. Little clips that you can buy. They're binding clips. They come in different sizes and different colors, and you can just put them along. If I'm going to use them, I use maybe 3 or 4, and then they just hold the binding steady for you. But I wouldn't pin all the way down, because I have found that usually I end up having to remove them anyways. Oh, see, my clip got stuck on my thing. So you just want to go nice and slow and just go all the way around. When you get about 1/4 inch away from the corner, which is where I am, then you just want to sew off. So we're just going to turn it and just kind of sew off. You don't want to do more than 1/4 inch, because then it's hard to do your corner, and you don't want to do less than 1/4 inch, because again, it's hard to do your corner. So now, here is the corner. So as you can see here, I sewed off. Not right off at the edge, but off a little bit. And then I'm going to take this fabric and I'm going to bring it up at a 45-degree angle. And then I'm going to just pull it back down, line it up with this section. So my corners aren't the best yet, but we're getting there. I try to do a nice mitered corner, but I'm not really very good at it. And then I just start sewing all the way down again. And you're just gonna do this all the way around. A 1/4 inch away, and then we're just gonna sew, just turn it so we sew off. And then again, you wanna just take your fabric, pull it all the way up, and all the way, get that 45-degree angle. This is a little bit tricky because right here it's joined together. There's a seam there, but it should be okay. I'm gonna clip it. My fingers will work. And then again, you have that little bit of fabric to make your corner on the other side. Then again, just start right at the corner and sew your 1/4 inch. Last corner. I'm gonna get ready to join them together. So you wanna make sure that you have about a 10-inch opening. You can do a little bit more, just make sure that you have enough with your tail. You wanna make sure you have enough fabric there. Just before my marking, I would backstitch, or I would, if your machine does a knot, you could do that. I'll just backstitch a little bit just so that it doesn't come apart when I'm trying to sew my ends together. So I stopped a bit before my piece, before my marker that I had. So this is the key, crucial part. You want to make sure that your ends join together nicely and that they don't, you don't have it too tight or too loose. So I have a nice big opening here, as you can see. I have a tail, and then of course I have the rest of my binding. You want to make sure that your binding goes all the way around. Okay, so we're at the end of our binding. What we're going to do is we have our tails. So we have our beginning tail that should be at least 10 inches long, can be a little bit longer. And then our ending tail again should be about 10 inches long or so. So what we're going to do is we're just actually going to, this is the way I do it. There are other tools that you can use to help you do your binding, but this is how I do my binding. So I lay this down, and then your top, I'm going to actually cut this piece off here because I know I don't need this piece. I don't want this weird folded corner. So there's my fabric, and then you want your fabric, your top fabric, to be the same width overlap. So if you take, see I cut that little piece off, if you take it, this is the width of my binding from there to there. So I'm going to use this as my guide. So this is actually that would be too close. I'm going to actually cut this off a little bit more. And I won't use that piece because it's got that weird fold. So there we go. I'm going to lay this down on here. I opened it up and I laid it down. That's the width of my fabric. And then I'm going to put this here, and I want it to overlap just the width of my binding. So if it's 2 inches, it's going to overlap 2 inches. If it's 2.5 inches. If you make an even bigger binding, then it's going to overlap that much. You can bring it to your cutting mat and use your rotary cutter, but scissors work just fine because you're not even going to see this. It gets buried in the quilt. I'm just going to make sure everything's lined up nice. and that my top one isn't too loose or too tight. Same with the bottom. You want it to lay nice and flat. And then I'm just gonna snip it. Now you can kind of, you know, feel like, oh, I don't want to snip it. It's not gonna work. But you have to snip it. We'll save the rest of that for another quilt. So then you don't need this piece, that's just a scrap. And then what you're gonna do now is I always have to have my quilt facing me. So this is backwards to you, but you open both of your pieces of fabric and you're going to make a plus sign. So you're gonna put right sides together. You're gonna take your left on the bottom, right on the top, right sides together, and you're gonna just put them in a plus sign like that. And you can pin it. You can pin it if you need to, or you can just hang on to it with a straight pin. I would pin it with a straight pin, not one of those binding clips. And we're gonna sew from corner to corner. So if you can see that there, I have this is my left side, this is my right side, left on the bottom, right on the top, open up that binding, put them together in a plus sign, and then sew from corner to corner. So from the upper left to the lower right. Just sew right there. Just eyeball it. You can draw a line. You could, before you put this on top of there, you could take it, draw a line. You can just eyeball it. If your tail is a little bit longer, it wouldn't be so close. Just gotta, getting it lined up is kind of the trick. If you go over a little bit, that's okay too. It doesn't have to be perfect. It can go over the bottom fabric. I'm gonna just slide right back over here. And I'm going, first what I do is I take my, I start in my corner and then I stop. Make sure your needle is down and then just line it all up on that angle. I have some tape on here that really helps to show where I need to go. And I make sure that my other corner is right there on that middle line where my needle is. And then I cut it there. And before I cut this excess off, I'm gonna make sure that it fits. So if you pull it, it should line up nice and you shouldn't have a bulge. If you have a bulge, it's because you probably left one a little bit too long. It happens, and sometimes you have a little bulge. Sometimes you can hide it, and so there you go. So there's the top, there's the back. Beautiful, you can't even tell. All I'm gonna do is reopen this, because if it didn't work, then I'd take my seam ripper, and I'd rip it out, and I'd try again. And then about 1/4 inch from your seam, you wanna just cut off this extra material. And then again, you're just gonna lay it flat, make sure it looks nice. And cut these little strings off. Too many little strings. Most of them you can hide in your binding when you flip it over, but I'll cut those out of the way. So then I'm gonna go back to where I finished, not where I started, back to where I finished. I'm gonna finish up this side of the quilt. And we're halfway done. And we're almost back to where we started. And then I'm just gonna back stitch a little bit just so I know it's gonna stay. We're gonna sew over that anyway, so you may not need to, but I like to do that. And then I always go and clip my corners, any thread there. If you have any parts that have a lot of batting, maybe extra batting, you could always go in and trim all that off just to make sure it looks really, really nice. Here's another string, these loose threads. You can cut them as you go. Now all you're gonna do is flip your quilt over. Now we're on the right side of the quilt. This one, I quilted just the other day. Then you're gonna take your binding and you're gonna bring it over the quilt like this. And you're just gonna line it up. You're gonna try to line it up with that seam line that you already did on the other side, or at least cover it up. There's a bunch of thread here. I'm just gonna cut it, get rid of that. Okay. I'll have to this one too. There. So again, don't start at a corner, start somewhere in the middle on any side. It doesn't matter, side, it doesn't matter. Just flip it over. This might be where you want those binding clips. I'll put a few of those in. So you just press, you can even iron it if you want. Iron the binding out so that it makes it easier to flip. All right, so I'm gonna start just before my first clip, and I'm gonna try to sew as close to this line as possible, to this edge. Not over the edge, because you wanna hold it down, but you wanna make sure it's nice and tight to there. Don't worry about your seam allowance, just try to get as close to the edge. This is where the same color fabric as your binding is important. Or another thing that I had done was I had made a border, and my binding and my border were the same color, and then I used the same color thread, and you can't even really see the mistakes, any wonky lines or anything. So you want to sew right as close to that edge as you can. You can use a, oops, I have it on going backwards. You can use a fancier stitch if you like a zigzag or a blanket stitch, or I'm just going to do a straight line stitching, which is what we usually do here at the studio anyways. And again, we're just going to sew as close to the edge as we can. I'm going to do a bit more, and then Catherine can zoom in and we can see how it looks. If you're using a variegated border, as this one is, just pick the color that you like, or if you okay, so here you can see I'm as close to the edge as I can get. Nice and close to that edge. You can barely see my stitch because the color blends in. I used a blue thread, which is what I prefer. All right, so I'm just gonna go over. Close to the corner. I'm just gonna cut these threads off. What you're gonna do is you're gonna bring this is the bottom, or the bottom of what I'm doing anyways. You're gonna bring it up. You're gonna watch you're gonna try to get a nice 45-degree slant. And I think I just get it by fluke. Just the way that you fold the material. This is what I usually do. I don't usually get that 45-degree angle. I usually just get some kind of a fold. Bottom under, and then fold the top above the bottom. I find that makes a nice corner, and I'm pleased with how that looks. It's not a perfectly mitered corner, but I'm okay with it. So then when I get to the edge, about a quarter, near the edge of this, of my binding, then I put my needle down and I rotate it. I don't take my needle up, I don't cut my thread, and then I just start again going on a new side. Again, trying to be as close to that edge as I can. I'm just gonna go to where they meet. I'll go over a little bit, and then I'll just back stitch or put a knot in it. And then just cut those threads off. So on the back, you might see some of your line, which is fine. It's not a big deal. You'll get better at it, and they'll look better. And then if you kind of keep it even, then they look really even too. Here I kind of went a little bit too tight onto the front. And then here it lines up really nice because I have equal amounts of binding in the front and in the back. That's what you want, that nice equal look. So your back will be nice and will look really, really nice, and then your front will look nice too. And you just want to go around and make sure that you didn't miss any spots. You don't have any openings, that it's all closed up nice. Cut off any loose threads. And then of course you're going to want to put a label on the quilt. So there, that is our binding tutorial all done. I'll just show you. I didn't make the quilt. I quilted the quilt, but I didn't make the quilt. And then I put the binding on. I think we've had this one sitting around for a little bit. So thank you to whoever made the beautiful top. And there you go. Thank you for joining us. If you have any other questions, you can email me or text me. All my information is on our website or our Facebook group. Thank you for joining me. Have a wonderful day. Miigwech.